High School, and the title of my research presentation is Parental Marital Status and Academic Performance of Students at James High School, and this is a study of how divorce may influence a child's academic endeavors. So the problem at hand is that divorce has become such a prominent issue in our society, and divorce rates continue to rise. And according to the Oklahoma State Department of Health, 13.5% of marriages in Oklahoma result in divorce, and we are the state with the third highest divorce rate. And with divorce becoming such a widespread phenomenon, I believe that students are being negatively affected in more ways than one. And oftentimes when we think about the effects of divorce on students, we think about how it affects them psychologically and emotionally, but we focus less on how it affects them in other aspects such as academics. So that is what my study aimed to focus on. So previous research has been done in this area of subject and topic, and the first source that I'm going to discuss is John Beer, and he is a professor at the Research College of Portland State University, and he conducted a study among 5th and 6th graders to see how parental divorce affects their self-concept and grade point average. And in his study, he had 31 participants, 12 which were from divorced homes and 19 which were from non-divorced homes. And through a compilation of surveys, he found that students from divorced homes scored lower on their self-concept, self-esteem, and self-esteem tests, as well as they had lower GPAs. And what this shows is that, back to what I said, divorce affects children in more than one ways, and his study kind of tried to show that it affected students academically and in the way they viewed themselves. The next source that was really influential in my study was Lindsay Guthman and Dr. Rebecca Robles-Pina, and they are family and marriage therapists, and they conducted research based off of 2 questions. The first question being, is there a difference between gender and ethnicity groups in the self-esteem score of adolescents from divorced and intact families? And the second question being, does participation in extracurricular activities influence the self-esteem of adolescents from divorced and intact families? And so what their study aimed to do was see how if a student was involved in more extracurricular activities, if it had anything to do with their parental marital status. And their study actually referred to the previous study that I just mentioned, conducted by John Beer, and their conclusions actually refuted some of his conclusions and accepted some of his. They refuted the fact that students scored lower on self-concept tests. They did not see that relationship through their study, and they actually agreed with the part about extracurricular students being less involved in extracurricular activities. And another source relating to this research would be by DJ Mulholland and Norman F. Watt. And this study was different from the other 2 because it primarily focused on the group that had divorced parents. So 96 students were chosen that were from divorced homes, and these students were chosen specifically because they showed academic deficits. And the objective of this was to compare them to a control group that also took the same survey, and they were students from non-divorced homes, and the number for that was actually not given, so I was unable to compare the 2 survey sample sizes. But what he did was he found that children from divorced homes, their deficits were due to the fact that there was marital discourse in their family. And he also established that this wasn't due to a lack of intelligence within the student themselves, but more because of what was going on in their home life around them. And some definitions that are important in this study, we hear them all the time, so they're kind of common terms that we understand, but academic achievement and performance and extracurricular activities. Academic achievement and performance is basically the outcome of education, and it's the extent to which a student has achieved or feels about achieving their educational goals. And extracurricular activities are anything that a student participates outside of the school realm, the normal curriculum. And some of examples of those are listed above, such as religious organizations, clubs, sports, leadership groups, and cultural clubs. So the question that I pose in this study is, how does the academic performance of students whose biological parents are married compare to the academic performance of students whose biological parents are divorced or never married? And my hypothesis, or my idea behind this, is that students with divorced parents will be less academically motivated and may less likely participate in extracurricular activities. So on to my method. For my method, I used a survey versus doing something such as an interview because I thought that this way I'd be able to reach more students quicker. And I created a survey using SurveyMonkey, and 6 random classes were selected, 3 which were AP courses and 3 which were on-level courses. And I distributed consent forms to each student in these classes, and they were asked to take them home and get them signed, and if their parents granted them permission to participate, the following week I distributed the survey links, and their teachers all allotted 10 to 15 minutes in class for students to participate in this survey. The first 3 questions on my survey consisted of demographic questions such as what grade are you in, what is your gender, and what race or ethnicity best describes you. The next 4 deal more with the student's grades and participancy in school things. So the first being, what is your GPA, which is a prominent factor that I studied in this research. What are your standardized test scores, which accounts for ACT and SAT scores? How many AP courses are you enrolled in for this school year? That question was included to see how heavy of a workload students were willing to take on for both categories, and how many extracurricular activities are you involved in? And I included this question because I believe that extracurricular activities play an important role in how a student performs academically. There are 2 questions about parental marital status. The first being, are your parents married or divorced? And this was the question that the survey was actually blocked by, so this is what created my 2 groups that I was comparing. And the next question being, if your parents are married or divorced, or if your parents are divorced or were never married, whom do you live with? The last section of my survey consisted of examine the following statement type of questions, and they were asked to rank them from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and they were questions that were asked so I could get a feel of how a student interacted with their parents or how they felt that their parents were involved in their studies. So questions such as, my parents encouraged me to do well in school, or I feel that my parents could be more supportive of my studies were asked in this portion of the survey. So my results to these questions. Of all the people that I passed out my link to and that participated, 162 students participated in this research study. And of those 162 students, 33 of them were in the sophomore class, 80 of them were in the junior class, and 49 of them were in the senior class. And as you can see, the numbers are really spread out here, which could have caused problems later in the data, considering that the sample sizes were very different for each grade. And of those 162 students, we had almost a 50-50 ratio of males to females, with it being 79 males and 83 females. So these are the statistics of the students that answered the question, are your parents married or divorced? 109 students answered that their parents were married, 38 students answered that their parents were divorced, 10 students answered other, and then 2 students preferred not to answer this question. So the 10 students and the 2 students were not used in this data. First, these graphs show the GPA of students that were counted. The left graph shows the GPA of students with married parents, and the right graph shows the GPA of students with divorced parents. And the most important thing to grasp from these graphs are that the red and blue sections, around 70% of students with married parents have obtained a 3.6 or above. Only around 40% of students with divorced parents have obtained a 3.6 or above. So that's where we see the most significant difference in these 2 graphs. The standardized test score question. This accounted for, like I said, the ACT and the SAT. And what I did not think about when I was creating this survey was that a lot of sophomores have not taken the SAT, and a lot of juniors will not take the SAT unless they are applying to a college that strictly asks for it, and same with seniors. So what I found with this was that there were only a couple respondents for this question, and the respondents that did actually give an answer were kind of invalid. They were answers such as I don't know, or 0, or I don't care. So I had to kind of eliminate those answers. And so I just took out the SAT question as a whole because I believe that it wasn't really relative to this data. So of the 109 students with married parents that participated in this survey, 83 students responded to this question. This question was more of a free response where students had to manually type in their ACT score. It wasn't like a multiple choice. And of the 83, invalid responses such as, like I said before, 0 or I don't know. So the average of these scores was taken, and the average was found to be a 26 for students with married parents. And then the same method was used for the students with divorced parents, and 4 of those responses of the 24 students that answered had to be eliminated. So those 20 ACT scores were averaged, and the average for that was a 24.7. And while these numbers are not that much different, I believe that that is probably due to how small the sample size was and how few respondents answered this question. And if more respondents answered this question, I do think that the number would have been had a wider difference. These graphs show the AP course enrollment of students for the 2015-2016 school year, and the left again being students with married parents, and the right again being students with divorced parents. And the higher percentage of students with married parents are enrolled in at least one AP course, as you can see on the graph to the left. We can see that the red section is 1 to 2, which is definitely the highest for both categories. And statistics here show that students with married parents are taking a heavier AP course load, and that might be due to different factors not related to their parental marital status, but that is what these statistics showed me. And extracurricular involvement, like I said, was also taken into account in this study. And for these graphs, there isn't much of a statistical difference in the results. However, there was a large percentage of students that have married parents that were more involved in 5 or more extracurricular activities, whereas you see in the graph with divorced parents, they were that category of 5 and more had the least percentage. And this was the last part, like I said, where I was trying to analyze how a student and parent interact with one another, and how a student feels about their parents' views towards their studies. And as I was analyzing all of these questions, I mostly found that the percentages were relatively similar, and so I couldn't make like a comparison between the two, because for both groups I found that there was no really statistical difference. But there were three statements that stood out to me, and the first being, I feel encouraged by my parents to succeed. And this part of the survey was supposed to be ranked on a scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And for these 3 statements, I actually combined the agree category with the strongly agree category, because students that answered strongly agree for these questions were mostly answered strongly agree all the way through, rather than like strongly agree on one and agree on one. So I combined those 2 to simplify the data and not construe the numbers. So I feel encouraged by my parents to succeed is the first statement where I saw the most significant difference in percent-wise. 92.45% of students with married parents agreed to this statement, and 82.35% of students with divorced parents agreed to this statement. And a 10% difference is not that significant, but when I was analyzing the data, it was one of the ones that had the highest percentage difference. The next one was, I study enough to succeed in my classes. 81.12% of students agreed with this, strongly agreed or agreed with this statement, and only 60% of students with divorced parents strongly agreed or agreed with this statement. And 28% for this question is a lot different than 10% for the last question, and that might be due to different factors other than their parental marital status, like I said before, but that was definitely something that caught my eye. And the last statement being, I feel that my parents could be more supportive of my academics. So the prior 2 questions, we see that students with married parents had a higher percentage of students that agreed. However, this one shows that more students with divorced parents agreed to this statement rather than married parents. And so we have 26.42% of students with married parents agreed to this statement, and 51.43% of students agreed with divorced parents. And I believe that this percentage difference could be to the fact that students that have divorced parents may be dealing with other things, and they feel as though they aren't receiving enough support in their academics. And that could be due to numerous things that were actually not accounted for in this study. And so, discussion. My findings, what I found were very similar to the 3 findings that I explained before.